Welcome to Inverness and Loch Ness, and thank you for choosing the Discover Loch Ness tour. Loch Ness was created 380 million years ago when the northern landmass slipped 65 miles to the southwest. The loch is 23 miles long, a mile wide and 754 feet deep. There's room enough for a few mysteries. Local people have claimed since about 1860 that there is a large fish in the loch, about the size of an upturned rowing boat. But it was in 1933 that turned into a monster. Mrs. Aldy Mackay saw something which was reported as being huge, enormous, like a whale. A local journalist wrote up the sighting for the Inverness Courier, and it became the Loch Ness Monster. In 1986, I was fortunate enough to meet Mrs. Mackay and discovered that what she had actually seen was only 6 to 9 feet long, just 2 or 3 meters. I remember saying, "Oh, Mrs. Mackay, why did you say it was so enormous then?" And I'll never forget her reply. "Well, I fish for salmon," she said. Well, here she is to tell you exactly what she saw.
There was a lot of duck close inshore, and there was a commotion there, but that meant nothing. And then, out of the loch was very flat, calm, as if you'd gone over it with an iron. And every cloud and every leaf and every tree was reflected in the water. And then suddenly, this thing came up. And I can see it still. It just rose out of the water, black, wet, with the water rolling off it. And I yelled at my husband, "Stop the beast." But of course he couldn't, because he had to pay attention. And by the time he had stopped, the thing had gone underneath, back down again. And then it suddenly shot off to the far side of the loch, still in the narrow Saltwater, and in a circle, and round, and down, and that was it.
We think Mrs. Mackay is genuine, but journalists flocked to the area after her sighting, and they wanted dinosaurs. Local people had great fun at their expense. A Mr. and Mrs. Spicer claimed the monster ran across the road in front of their car, and this was the first dinosaur-type sighting. No one would have believed in the dinosaur theory if a young vet called Arthur Grant, just a few days later, hadn't claimed that the monster, with a sheep in its mouth, had knocked him off his motorbike. The Daily Mail decided that a big game hunter could solve the mystery, and they employed Marmaduke Wetherell. Here he is, finding footprints. And when the footprints turned out to be from a hippopotamus, the whole subject became a joke, and what the local people had really been seeing was lost in among all these fakes and hoaxes. The tourist industry at Loch Ness was given a wonderful boost, however.
Loch Ness, on which the eyes of the world are focused, the reputed haunt of a prehistoric monster or monsters, and the newly found adventure ground of modern Gullivers. Mr. Wetherell, the big game hunter, and his party, who have been hot on the trail of the monster for some time, set out from Fires to comb the lake. There is competition from local enthusiasts, with ambitions to earn eternal fame for the discovery of a species long thought fabulous. One optimist has conceived the idea of bailing out the lake, and all along the loch side, a well-fortified watch is being maintained by good Scotsmen. Meanwhile, a specially organized movie-tone expedition consisting of a full big game camera crew unit sets out from London armed to the teeth.
When Wetherell was fired for hoaxing, he decided to create one final fake. He had his stepson, Sperling, make a small model for him, which he floated out on the loch on top of a toy submarine. The resultant photograph was then given to a surgeon, Colonel Wilson, who, in order to add credibility, claimed that he had taken it. If you see the full frame, you can see that it is actually a very small object anyway. Now, if you just think seriously for a moment, you can see that the monster had changed from a fish to a dinosaur to a plesiosaur. All of this happened in a matter of months, and it is the plesiosaur which the tourist industry has adopted. Great fun. There are other pictures, of course. What about those? This is the first ever picture from 1933. Is it a huge beast in the water, or a golden Labrador dog swimming towards the camera with a stick in its mouth? The dog's nose is the dark central shape. This one is a log. The photographer later admitted it. This is a photographic fake. Notice that the reflection of Urquhart Castle leans to the right, a physical impossibility, which could only have been caused by re-photographing a previous print very badly. Now, why would any genuine person want to do that? It's not difficult to see how Frank Searle faked this picture. Probably the most disappointing fake of them all is this one, the famous flipper picture from 1972. In 1984, the Loch Ness project noticed not only that there were brush marks around the edge of the flipper, but also that there were shadows on both sides. How could that occur with a single light source? Dr. Rines of the Boston Academy of Applied Science had taken the picture, but the original was very murky. He sent this to NASA, who computer enhanced it. Dr. Rines then sent the enhancement to MIT Review, a scientific journal, who published the faked version. Dr. Rines told us that when MIT Review returned the enhancement, no one had noticed that it had been retouched. Here, however, is the actual NASA enhancement, and it bears no resemblance to the faked version. How could anyone not have noticed the difference? Sorry, it's fate. But at least that's all the bad news out of the way. In 1940, a Wellington bomber aeroplane crashed in Loch Ness. In 1981, the Loch Ness project assisted Heriot-Watt University to carry out a video survey of the plane. Some of these sequences are quite dramatic. In 1984, the plane was raised and is now in the Brooklands Museum in Weybridge in Surrey. Here's a short news item on it.
Has been lowered until it is just 10 feet above the bomber, and nylon strops have been slung between the two. It's been a long and painstaking process, but the lifting gear is in position. The only mystery is recent damage to the top of the plane. It's thought that perhaps a much older resident of the loch may be getting a little jealous of the new attraction.
With all of these fakes and hoaxes, it's a wonder anyone carried on looking. But Adrian Shine, leader of the British group, decided to start a scientific study of these great lochs. He also believed that eyewitnesses were really seeing something. But what? Could it be some sort of big fish? If it was, how would you try to find it? Sitting watching the surface was hopeless in the quest for a big fish. Adrian Shine built this boat, the John Murray, and began a 3-year series of sonar patrols scanning the deep water. 40 strong sonar contacts were obtained. These were very deep and apparently alive, and were strong enough to be large animals.
Tilt 38, bearing green 150.
What was that line coming down the screen, Rob?
That's telling us the distance from the transducer. Of course, it isn't a vertical distance, it isn't a depth. It's a distance along the sonar beam.
And that's an important echo we got there. But a sonar can be misleading. A moving boat, for instance, could contact a stationary object and make it appear to be alive. To resolve this, Adrian Shine came up with Operation Deep Scan, a fleet of 20 boats, line abreast, moving a sonar curtain up and down the loch. If anything was contacted, its position would be fixed and an attempt would be made to track it.
A long time ago, I made contact with several strong sonar contacts in Loch Ness, and obviously in a loch with this reputation, we'd like to get to the bottom of that. We're hoping now to use the Lorentz sounders to get an unambiguous echo record.
Although stationary objects caused most of the contacts, there were 3 of exceptional strength and range. What is more important is that they appeared to be alive. The press, still wanting dinosaurs of course, were disappointed with the results. When Adrian was asked what the 3 contacts may be, he tried to be very scientific, very credible, and very conservative. He said, well, they could be big fish like salmon. An Australian journalist quipped, do you mean to say I've brought a television crew 12,000 miles for a big salmon? Other journalists laughed at this, but the locals were furious, jeering from the back of the room and shouting various comments about Adrian's English origins and his mother's marital status. In the end, it was Darrell Lawrence, the sonar manufacturer, who saved the day. He did this by saying that, in his opinion, the contacts were larger than sharks but smaller than whales.
Deep water contact we achieved. It's circled here, and it's this mark here where a fish or animal, you can see it was, the boat came over, it was at a certain depth, almost 192 meters. It came up some and then it went back down. It was under the boat for some extended period of time. That signal we can't explain. We know it was some living object that moved.
Now, if you've ever wondered about this mystery and wanted to solve it for yourself, now's your big opportunity. You've got a few seconds to come up with the name of a fish, bigger than a shark, but smaller than a whale, which could be living in the deep, cold, fresh water of Loch Ness. Your time starts now. Did any of you think of the fish which produces caviar? The sturgeon? This one was 11 feet, 3.4 meters long and 100 years old. This one, 20 feet, 6 meters long. The world record was 27 feet, 8.3 meters long and 240 years old. That was a Russian fish, and the Atlantic sturgeon, now almost extinct, doesn't quite reach those epic proportions. But the interesting thing is that when they come into cold, fresh water, their metabolic rate drops, food consumption decreases, and it would be possible for there to be 1 or 2 in the loch, getting larger and larger over the years. A 200-year-old sturgeon is Nessie? Hardly very exciting, but perhaps a real monster after all. Nevertheless, if you prefer to believe in plesiosaurs, We're not going to stop you. Here's an opportunity to do just that. Listen to Father Gregory, one of the monks from Fort Augustus Abbey. Now, I think he just saw a tree rolling over in the water. But if you would rather think he saw a real animal, then you can take away from Loch Ness whatever monster you prefer.
Well, it was a beautiful morning in October 1972, and I wasn't thinking of Nessie at the time, but we had a guest, an eminent organist from Westminster, and I suggested going down to the loch and having a look at the view. We have a magnificent view down the loch from our monastery garden, and we were standing on that jetty, to the stone jetty over there, admiring the view, and now suddenly our eyes caught sight of a tremendous agitation in the bay over there to our right. We could see the water being churned up by something, but we couldn't make it out first of all because there was nothing above the surface, but I could see spray being lashed off the surface. Then a few seconds afterwards, believe it or not, we saw this great neck emerge from the water, at least about 5 feet we estimate above the water at an angle. Head and neck seemed to be one, moving slowly towards the middle of the loch, rather slowly, for about 20 seconds. We never caught sight of the humps, but this great neck moving along, then it moved down with a sideways kind of motion, disappeared, and we hadn't drunk a drop of whiskey that morning.